Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Louise de Beuzeville. Louise is a teacher of the deaf and a linguist with expertise in first language acquisition. She works at the Next Sense School Sign Bilingual program 3 days a week and is lead education research for 2 days a week, as well as being a conjoint lecturer with Next Sense Institute. She has worked in the field of deaf education and signed language linguistics for over 25 years. For the last 12 years, she has largely been working in a school setting and teaching young deaf children through Auslan, while also keeping her finger in many pies, such as being one of the curriculum writers for the ACARA Auslan National Curriculum and working on an online Auslan assessment tool. Her research has focused on the acquisition of Auslan by young deaf children and from deaf families, and the use of space and spatial language in Auslan by deaf native signing adults and children. Lou is passionate about evidence-based practice in language and literacy development. So I'll now hand you over to the expert.
Yes, title, right. I will do my utmost, anyone who's deaf, to not sign, but it is hard when I'm in like the school environment. So yeah, if I start signing and distracting, just let me know. Okay, so tonight I'll have a quick introduction and then explain a little bit about some differences between Auslan and English. I've just picked a few examples because of conversations I've had with parents in the past and some parent groups we have at Next Sense. Yeah, there's been some misunderstandings about the structure of Auslan, so I thought I'd start with that and why you can't just drop the little words, which is something that I've heard more than once, like when you're trying to sign, you don't just drop the little English words. I want to talk about the importance of and ideas for providing access to a range of fluent models, natural ways you can promote language at home, and a little plug for fingerspelling lots with your kids at the end. I'd hope to talk about vocab. Generally, I have one slide per 3 or 4 minutes. I've got more than a slide per 2 minutes. There's no hope of getting to vocab. Happy to do it another time. Yeah. Oh, and questions are going to be at the end just because of numbers. I'll let people read this for a second. Above me, yes. I never know how to judge if that's enough time, because I've read that quote a lot of times. I really like the quote, giving you the idea. I've translated that into what that means for us. So I'm going to stop sharing PowerPoint for a second and show you 2 little videos, or parts of 2 videos to show you we're talking in terms of signing. We're talking about getting from what the baby does to what the native signing adult does. I'll just show you a little bit of this 1-minute video. She's signing mum, food, or eat. So that's a baby's first signs. And this is just a little section of a very good storyteller, native signing adult storyteller. Basically, the first video is a baby, a deaf boy with a hearing mother, deaf father, doing his first signs. So the mother is signing mum to him, and he's sort of signing an approximation back. And then she's signing eat. And what's quite funny is he starts signing and then just turns it into sucking the thumb. But it shows the incredible amount that kids have to learn in mostly the first sort of 5 to maybe 10 years of their life of language. So as I said, I want to cover some differences between Auslan and English, because I think that there is often a perception, well, there is a perception, like parents have outright asked, oh, we still got, oh, yes, there's some people with microphones on, if people could please mute. Yeah, so parents have often asked me, but there isn't really actually any grammar. Or often in Australia, we have a lot of monolinguals. We're very distant from other countries, so we can kind of get away with being incredibly monolingual compared to the rest of the world. The majority of people in the world speak more than one language. Like, it's not amazing, it's actually normal. And yeah, and so I think that it's important to cover just a few little examples. So for example, things that you might think, well, it's obvious, of course all languages have tense. English has got tense. That is marking on the verb to show if it's happened now, in the past, in the future. Auslan doesn't show it, but neither does Mandarin, Indonesian, many First Nations languages of North America. So many languages don't show tense, they show time in other ways. Determiners, words like the and English has, Auslan doesn't. Not bad grammar, neither does Serbo-Croatian, neither does Mandarin, Chinese, neither do many languages. Auslan can say, and not just Auslan, but is it new interpreter time?
Did I go through?
Oh, sorry, you mustn't be pinned on mine, you just disappeared. They've disappeared, okay. Auslan and other languages can say things like we, us, but not you, as opposed to we, including you. Many languages have that, this we inclusive, or we, not you. For some verbs in Auslan, you can show if something happened again and again or a one-off. English can't do that. So the basic point, and I need to shrink myself, is that all languages have grammar, or they're not languages. All languages can express anything you need to. If the language doesn't have a way to express it, then they will invent a way, quickly, naturally invent a way to express it if the need arises. The two examples I've chosen to show are of things that happen, you know, the way things happen in Auslan. One is manner. So when you talk about how a verb happened, English uses separate words like quickly, you know, a person did something quickly or they did something lazily. Auslan can use a separate word, but it is much more common to use non-manual features. Non-manual means anything that's not on the hands. So your body, your facial expressions, particularly the mouth. So for example, if you want to show something happened with intensity or very, English will use the word very. So like they ran very fast, etc. But sometimes they'll actually have a different word, like someone's tired versus exhausted. Auslan can sign very, but it's actually not very common. People don't use the sign very commonly. They usually show intensity by changing how you sign that adjective or adverb. So if you see, I'm not going to jump out again because I'm going to send you the links. The man with the big beard, when he shows excited, he was showing like really excited. So he doesn't need to say very excited. He actually shows that it's more than average excited. The second example, which I always find really fascinating, things like spatial words like in or on. So they did some research in the 90s on terms like in or on. Melissa Bowerman, Bowerman, and colleagues, and had a whole different bunch of things you can do to make objects come in contact with other objects, and then asked speakers how they describe that. The ones shaded in blue in English, everybody called on, except for one where some people said on and some said in, a log on a train or in a train. But in general, people talk about joining Lego, putting a hat, a top on a pen, a Band-Aid on a hand. They'll always use the word on in English. And in things like putting Lego in a bag, cars in a box, a cassette tape, old research, cassette tape into the little cassette tape, what do you call them? Cases. Those were all English speakers all use in. And it seems like really obvious. Well, of course, those ones are in and those ones are on. But when you look at Korean speakers, so here is on in English. Here is how Korean speakers divide up on. So on, if it's clothing, has different words, clothing on your head, clothing on your body, different types of words. I can't remember what the category was, but suitcase on a table, doll on a towel, log on a train. I think it was horizontal, making contact and the surface is horizontal. They have a verb, a preposition or a verb, I'm not sure, for whether there's a hook involved. So for them, there's no such thing as a category on. It depends what type of on. Ditto in Auslan. I guessed all of these right. I checked with 2 colleagues today. How would you sign this? How would you sign that? And basically, joining those 2 toys would have the same sign, but almost all of these, you would use a different sign for every one of them. So while there is a sign on in Auslan, and it is used sometimes in Auslan, in most situations it actually isn't used by native signers. Similarly, these are all in English. Seems like really obvious because we think there's a container of some sort, there's a hole in it in some way, and things go into that hole. It seems like that's just really obvious. In Korean, if they go in tightly or they go in loosely, it's a different word. So the way you join Lego or button a dress has a word like in, tightly, whereas putting something into a small thing in a bag is loose. It's not a tight fit, so it gets a different word. Ditto in Auslan from my sample of 2 signers today at lunch, but I'm fairly sure we get similar. And actually, no, there was a few more I asked for this one. Pieces into a puzzle, Legos into a bag. If you weren't showing your second hand, you might use the same sign for how you're putting it in. Most of the others, different, except for, again, if you're not showing what it's going into, like the actual shape of the bath, then they would use the same hand shape for what you're putting in. So, it must be at the beginning of here. Yes, sorry. So I should have sort of got that out of order. So the point of this is that in and on, as we use them in English, are not universal concepts. All languages differ with how they break up the world and talk about the world. Manner can be discussed in different ways. And that is, it's not that there isn't grammar because Auslan's not using those signs. It's that it's a different type of grammar. It shows the world in a really different way, like all languages do. All languages, break up the world in a very different way. Often people signing Auslan will drop the English grammar. They'll say, I'm not going to do the is or the on, but they're not adding the stuff you need to. So what you're doing is not really giving a child access to either. Now, I'm not against children who've got pretty good functional hearing, who need some support, having keyword sign to help them, especially in context of literacy, learning English. I'm not someone who's against any type of signing like that, but it's not enough to be a child's only language. So if a child has no access to sound, they're not learning spoken English, and you're dropping off the little words, and I don't mean you, I mean their teachers, whoever, and not having the fluency in Auslan and adding these other things in, then they're actually not getting anything. They don't know how to say certain things. So if you drop the to in I went to town on a bus, how do you know you're going to town, not away from town? You know, I go town bus, like you left it or you went to it. So it's not a case of dropping the little words. I have to say, I don't hear that as often as I used to, but 100 years ago when I learned to sign, I remember hearing that a lot. People would say, oh, you just don't say the little words. You just don't sign the little words. It's so weird to have no visual feedback with people or check in. Is that clear? But I'm going to have to just keep going. So I want to talk about how important it is and ideas for providing access to a range of fluent signers. No, I can't do a point button. English, I'm going to talk here about the range of signing you can have in Auslan. So have a quick look at the diagram and I'll move me. In English, English speakers use most often words and sentences. That's right, you've got to point backwards. I've forgotten that since I last did this. They use words that you can find in a dictionary. They will sometimes use gestures that are like symbols that everybody knows in that culture that this means good or that means oh damn. And while talking, they'll do what I'm doing here, which is co-speech gesture, which is moving your hands in particular ways I won't go into, but it does give information about what you're talking about. This is typically how people say things in spoken English. Signers, however, use a whole range of ways of communicating. They will use signs, which are like words. That is, I can just go to Sign Bank or a dictionary and look up that sign and it looks like that. I can tell the last time I did this diagram, I was talking about the boy who cried wolf stories because of the examples. So for example, boy or wolf. They will use fingerspelling, either fingerspelling whole words or shortened forms, which have become words. They will use a lot of mouthing. Most deaf signers use a lot of mouthing. There was a very good paper on that a few years back. Lots of pointing, but pointing in conventional ways. So your handshake can say whether it's a pronoun or a possessive pronoun like he or his. They will use verbs that can change. Some verbs don't change regardless of anything. Other verbs will change direction or orientation to say different locations or who did something, who it's being done to. They will use something called depicting signs, which I could happily talk to you about for a few hours because that was my PhD. And I find them fascinating, but I won't. But it's basically a highly conventionalized form of gesture that's very, very visual. It's like drawing in 3 dimensions with hands. And you go, oh yeah, that looks like that. Of course. But can you do it? I've been signing for nearly 30 years and I still will try really hard and prepare to read a story and then turn and a deaf teacher aide will just go, or sign this. And I'll be like, damn, like that's just so much clearer than I just did. Like it's really very hard. They'll use mouth gestures, which I won't go into, but it's different to mouthing an actual word, but it has information. They'll also use gestures like would, whatever, and sometimes enactment or role shift or constructed action. So there is a whole range of ways people communicate in Auslan. And the issue is that when we look at texts of hearing people signing or deaf people who've learnt to sign late, you usually see lots and lots and lots of what is at the top, very little of the stuff at the bottom of this diagram. When you watch a native signer, if you watch the link I gave to that I will give you to that man, most of what he's doing is down the bottom. He's using some signs, but lots of it is enacted. It's very visual, and I guarantee you, if I tell that same story and 100 kids are in front of us, none of them are going to look at me, they're going to look at him, because it's much more engaging, a much richer way of signing. So this is not to say like it's all hopeless. I communicate fine with the kids I teach. I wouldn't do my job if I thought that I wasn't adding value. So it's not that, you know, you've got no hope, but let me tell you, you're just never going to be like a deaf native signer, because it's just tragic. They're awesome at these things, especially if they're a gifted sort of storyteller. The importance is, though, that we have to expose our kids to all of this type of signing. Sorry to flash around, especially deaf people, but how will our kids ever do this stuff at the bottom if they never see it? If they go to a school and they're only seeing hearing teachers telling a story, how are they ever going to know about the other things, let alone, you know, acquire it? I'll leave this up for a second first because it's got a lot of text. So, and I'm also happy to share these slides, although I suppose the presentation's shared as well, if people want. So the thing is, this type of signing is incredibly rich and complex, and it's the types of things that children acquire last. So I looked in particular at depicting signs for my PhD, and at 10, kids weren't yet adult-like. They were still making errors that adults didn't make. And we filmed adults, that's how I know adults didn't make the errors. Or not necessarily errors, but doing things in much more simple ways than the adults would. How do we make sure that the kids get exposure, that kids who are in a country like Australia, we don't have the luxury of everyone being in massive cities with lots of access to you know, lots of signers. It is much better these days, at least we've got online access, but how do we ensure that kids get exposure to this type of signing? Again, heavy text, so I'll just leave it for a minute for you to read. So I guess one of the things is to recognise, and that's what I'm trying to get at, that there are actually real differences between native signers and late signers. I have a lot of trouble working with education departments sometimes to do with Auslan as a LOTE in getting them to understand that the children are literally just not getting the same language if you get someone in who's just learning to sign at the same time. So the first thing is to really recognize the difference between those types. In another presentation, I once showed several people online who put stories up of themselves signing stories, a very common story, and then the exact same one signed by a native signer. And it was just so obvious. It was just very obvious, the types of sort of signing. So one is just having that recognition. Use services, if they are available where you live, use services that offer a bilingual approach. If they claim to and that you're not offered it, you need to advocate. But basically, no one should be discouraging you from aiming for your child to have the very best Auslan and the very best English possible. The best outcomes come when you give the kids both. That doesn't mean everyone can, not all kids are going to have the listening ability to have spoken English. And it's a fine line between encouraging them to like and develop both and not showing that there's such value in spoken English, because it may not be something for all kids. It's not for all kids. But as much as possible, showing that the languages are equal and, giving your kids options. I don't like either being taken away from a child. Like, I think that kids have the right to learn as, both languages. Use any and all resources you can. Deaf mentors, Auslan in the home, Auslan language models. So in Queensland and now at Next Sense, they have Auslan language models in early intervention, so that we've just started rolling it out and hired some, so that in play groups you always have someone there. So it may be a play group offering spoken English, but there's still also going to be an interpreter and a deaf person there. So in most capital cities, and I know not everyone will come from a capital city, but in most capital cities or sort of satellite cities near capital cities, you should be able to find something like that. I do know that, well, certainly from what I've heard in Sydney, Queensland, Melbourne at least, I know that finding an actual available deaf mentor or Auslan in the home teacher is not always easy. Like it is, there is a greater need. There has obviously always been that want and need. Now that parents have the choice, rather than organisations having the choice on what to provide, it's very clear that more people want these things than we are able to staff. That, the deaf people have not been trained up to be in these positions in the past, but I do hope over the next few years that changes greatly. Another thing is, as well as accessing resources that you can easily access, this is easy for me to say. I don't have kids, and if I had a deaf child, I often think I would just die of exhaustion. Like, I really think I'd die of exhaustion. You've got to advocate for your kid, especially if you are choosing Auslan, and especially really if you're choosing both. I hear often from parents that NDIS says, no, you pick one or the other, which is ridiculous. You either have speech or you have Auslan in the home. So, and if they don't learn to speak, so do we just not give any child the option of learning to speak because we've got to have the Auslan in the home? Like, it's ludicrous. So you're going to have to be ready to advocate and fight, ask for a review. If your child is in a mainstream school, do they have access to fluent signing adults, not someone who's learned at the same time, who's learning at the same time? Even if they do they have any peers they can talk to? I do get a bit frustrated with, oh yeah, but the school's got Auslan low. Okay, but the kids at our school, and I know not everybody lives in the capital city, I'm not saying I have the solution, but they have a huge bunch of kids that they can have a fluent conversation with, not a conversation with someone who's learning. So not only is that a way they get to express themselves, but they learn from it. Like, any of our kids, if they were isolated, wouldn't have the access. Like, they basically learn much more sign from each other than us, I'm quite sure. And so that's something to think about, getting your kids access to other kids as well as adults. Use all the great online resources, especially in lockdown. Some people, very generous people, started putting up stories online, but try as much as you can tell to watch stories by fluent native signers, or at least very fluent deaf signers, not some hearing person who's just learnt to sign and wants to put a story up of them telling, especially when there's existing, like this particular example I'd chosen. I felt bad showing someone, here's an example of a bad signer, but then I thought, you can easily get the really good one. Like there's just no need to be doing, to be putting up a video apart from cultural appropriation. It's just someone will end up seeing that and going, oh, great, and then learning wrong signs when one exists that's actually signed really well. As much as possible, upskill yourself. I do know it's hard, you know, not from experience, childless, but I do know that from friends, if you've got 6 kids and one's deaf, it's not like you've got every night of the week to go out and learn to sign. But as much as possible, upskill yourself. Your child is going to overtake you. They just are, because unless they have a really big problem with communication, they're just going to get more fluent than you, but learn from them. And give your kids as much opportunities as you can to socialise with signing deaf kids and adults. I've always felt sort of bad for our kids that are the only, or that don't have deaf parents to sort of read stories and don't have signing parents. But I often, I never sort of contemplated the not having siblings. And I stayed in Perth with a friend who's got 3 deaf kids, and just watching them fight, negotiate, play, I realised how much language our kids miss out on from not being able to do those things. So, you know, whatever state you're in, if you're near a capital city, find playgroups, find those kind of places where they can meet other deaf kids. And I'm always obsessed with and talking about language acquisition. Obviously, this also benefits identity, mental health, etc. But my fascination is with their language acquisition. But yeah, it's good for them in many, many ways. It doesn't mean though, oh, I must have reordered my slides. I'm going to jump forward for 1 second. You are a great resource. It doesn't mean, where's my camera? It doesn't mean that you are not going to be able to give them language because you can't sign like a native signer. Do not feel that. Some of the best signers we've had at this school have had parents who've really made an effort to sign everything, even though it's quite English, but the kids have had access from very young to lots and lots of signing, and then they've put them in places where they get access to fluent signers. One of the best things you can do is make a conscious effort. Yes, it's exhausting, but always sign in front of your child, even if you're talking to someone else. Have arguments in front of your child with your spouse. Like, it's something deaf kids don't learn how to argue and resolve things because nobody signs it, because, oh, the kids don't need to know. But hearing kids hear all of that and they learn from that. Surround your kid with natural language, not just in a 1 hour you sit there, but talk, sign in front of them as much as possible. Obviously, kids who, hearing children in the family who may be much more comfortable in English, they do also have the right sometimes, I feel, to not have to struggle, especially if they're older and haven't been signing from young, to not have to struggle. There needs to be times that they can talk with you, but those times shouldn't be while the deaf child's just sitting there sort of staring into space. Always sign at the dinner table. It's a humongous issue with deaf adults, is sitting at the dinner table and not understanding anything. And I'm going to jump back in a second, always make sure your child can see you before you sign. So don't sign until they're actually looking at you, because there's just no point. Just jumping back. Oh, no. So what is necessary and sufficient to actually learn language? Kids need language directed at them, not just talked around them, but language that's directed at them, from fluent models, from birth or very early, for huge amounts of time, and containing many repetitions of different chunks of language. For many of the signing kids, certainly the ones we see at school, they don't get language directed to them, or it's very restricted or reduced. They often have not a lot of access to fluent models. I mean, the fact that you're here on this Zoom probably means you guys are already, you know, trying, but some parents don't learn to sign for whatever reason. Family, you know, dynamics just don't. We often have kids who just can't communicate in their own family. Some children will get language, but not from birth, from 3 or 5 or 6 or 7. For extensive periods of time, again, if there's no signing at home, then the kids really don't have a huge amount of time in sign. They'll get what they get in school, or they'll get what they get at certain times. I just saw a comment pop up about Auslan's story time at libraries. True. Auslan's story time is also another great resource. So I'm very easily like, oh, shiny thing, distracted. Also, sometimes the types of language families use, because they are a learner of the language, can be very functional and concrete, not the whole range of language that they would say with and in front of hearing kids. Studies show that there is a strong correlation between amount of input to a child and the ease they learn a language. The more a child gestures at 1.5, this is hearing kids, the more they gesture at 1.5, the bigger their vocab at 3.5. So hopefully no one in this day and age hears not to even gesture with your child who's deaf, because it's very, very helpful to all kids. The things that they gesture about tends to be their first words or signs. Kids will gesture and say a word almost always before they say 2 words or sign 2 words. The amount kids imitate you, then this should be in the other order. The amount they imitate you is correlated with the amount of their gestural development, which is then correlated with their language. Don't worry about that last one. I should have taken that out. No, I think I have a slide, sorry. So joint attention, not all of you are going to have a baby, but I'm guessing at least 1 or 2 parents might have a child under 2. Joint attention, I'll give you a second to read that because it's solid. So when I was doing my master's, I can remember at the time, with the sort of theories of linguistics I was reading about, thinking, oh, would you stop going on about all this stuff before they're even 1? Like, I wanted to know what happened once the kids start producing language. And we spent weeks and weeks, it felt like, on all these developmental things up to it. Now I realise how absolutely crucial it is and how wrong I was, because if you don't have those things, you just aren't going to get the language. So one of them is having attention on the same thing. Kids learn language by context. If I'm talking about something and the kid has no idea what I'm talking about, they're not going to learn that talking, what those words or signs mean. So joint attention is absolutely crucial. I'm going to send you guys this. I'm not going to jump out and jump in because it'll take too long, but there's a lovely little video on YouTube of Darlene Thornton in Sydney signing a book with, it's actually a hearing baby. She's deaf, but the baby's hearing. But it is just beautiful. It's a baby. I think he's under 1 at the time. And she is signing a story to him, but also talking to the camera about what it is she's doing to help parents know what to do. She's signing on his body. She's signing between the book and him so that he can see. Every time you watch, she waits until he's looking before she signs. It's really crucial, or kids aren't going to actually learn the language. So this idea of you and the child sharing attention on a particular thing is really, really, really important. Was that all I said? Okay, I thought I missed some more. So you are a great resource. I said that. What is helpful for language development? Language that's produced in a way that the kids' attention is maximised. So follow their interests. Now, at home, you easily can. If I were presenting this to teachers, I'd be like, watch yourself, because I've been doing this for a million years. I'm a huge believer in this. And the other day I realized I cut off some kids talking about what like it's a low language group that I do this half an hour a day with. And I cut them off because I was like, we've got to get to this activity. But the point of the activity was to get them talking. And I realized after, why did I do that? They were talking about something else. We don't have to do the activity because they were already interested in something else. It was about people's teeth falling out, like their own teeth falling out, tooth fairy and whatever. So follow the child's interests. Language should be encouraged. It should not be forced. Sign this at me, sign this at me. Remember, hearing kids hear language for at least a year and lots of it before they speak. Don't start signing at a child. Like if you start when they're 3, don't expect at 3 years, 1 month, they're going to be signing back, because they're not. Language has to be used in a natural way at the child's level. And it has to be something that they need to actually talk about or want to talk about. So I often find, colours or something is a goal, but I don't think kids really need to talk about the colour. Like they don't naturally want to talk about the colour of things. What they want to talk about is the people in their life, who's doing what, that kind of thing. So rather than just like, this is all the animals that we'll never see, or, farm animals, and I don't live on a farm. Talk about things that are really linked to your child's life. And I have a personal hate of this whole learning the alphabet in order. It's just, it is a hearing kid thing, I get it. And it's very useful for kids to look up things in a dictionary. If your child is profoundly deaf and not going to use phonics to learn to read and write, why do they need to know that B comes after A or C comes after B? Like they just don't. What doesn't help? Aiming too high. So if the kid's language level is here, don't try to make them do something here. Forcing kids to repeat corrections in any language is frustrating for the child and an utter waste of your time, because there are so many examples of where people have tried and the child will finally force it out and then repeat what they wanted to say anyway. They're not ready for that. They're not going to be able to say that construction. It's just too complex. Rote learning vocab without context. Learning vocab and then not hearing or seeing it again. They're just not going to remember it. Oh, look, I've put in the alphabet thing again. Well, there is a question about alphabet. I'm curious, but I can't see the whole question. So I'm nearly finished. I've just a couple of slides. One of the really big errors I made for probably when I first, so I taught deaf kids in the sort of late 90s, but they were older. And then, I went, a deaf school shut down. I went to a hearing school language disorder unit for a couple of years. And then I actually ended up going into academia. And so doing a PhD and the postdoc and then working at Sydney Uni. When I came back to teaching, 2012, from then on I remember better because old and I forget that long ago. But I do know for at least 5 years, I had an argument with a deaf person. I've since told them, I told them the day I found out I'm completely wrong and you're right, about fingerspelling with kids who have really, really low language. My feeling was the kid can't even produce a single sign. It was also a physical issue. Why are we worrying about fingerspelling things? They don't know single signs. But in actual fact, I was completely wrong, because kids don't have to fingerspell it back. They will learn to I'm thinking an English word. They will learn it receptively. They will be able to understand the fingerspelling. Deaf parents fingerspell to their babies early and often. They believe that, like reading, it's really important to give them early exposure. Children with deaf parents will often fingerspell back at a very young age. but they're not doing each letter. They'll often miss some, but they can see sort of the shape of the word. So children actually learn to fingerspell words twice, basically. So there's a researcher pattern who did a lot of this 25 years ago. They will often learn first the word as a whole chunk. So, for example, I had a child, a native signer, come to me. He was a very young kindy child, like 4.5 at the time or something, and asked me how to write and fingerspelled egg, which is the sign for egg is egg. Asked me how to write it, but he just spelled it to me. So I was like, I said egg, which can be a sign, and he goes, no, writing. And so I said, I thought, he doesn't remember how to make the letters. So I started tracing in the air what an E looks like and a G looks like. And he went, no, fingerspell. And I went, egg. And he was like, it never occurred to him that the sign egg was E-G-G. If I said write E, he could do that. Write G, he could do that. But egg was just a sign to him. He didn't see it as fingerspelling. So in this first stage, it's just like a sign. Your hands do this. They're not seeing it as separate letters. Then from about 4 or 5 onwards, they start learning that each of those hand shapes or hand configurations equals a letter. And they're aware that, things get spelt like this. And then, it takes a lot of practice to be spelling all of the words. So it is actually super important that you do fingerspell to your kids early and often. Skill in fingerspelling is correlated with literacy skill. They can recognize it very young, even if they don't reproduce it. And yeah, it's just something very important that I wanted to add in, because I think it's kind of counterintuitive that you would be spelling words out when kids can't even sign them. But it is actually important. I finished on time. I'm very good at finishing on time. 2 minutes over my 50 minutes. Questions, how do we do these? I can look in the chat. How do you discern a reputable provider is a lot harder. I guess for number one, I would want to know that they're a deaf person involved in the deaf community, that they have been signing for many years, not, the last year or two, that I guess that it's their primary language, and then really just talking to other people. It can be hard to know. And if it's your child, learning just a few signs, it's not going to be their primary language. I think it's less of something to stress about. I would stress about it if it's going to be their whole language. You really need to know that you've got a good fluent person. So, okay. If you mean learn the finger spelling, learn how to spell those letters, definitely. If you mean learning that it goes A, B, C, D in that order, my thing would, you probably can't stop whatever's happening at school anyway, but my thing would be why. Are they going to look up things in alphabetical order? Do they have enough literacy knowledge now that they might look things up in alphabetical order? If so, definitely. If not, because some of our kids, even when they're older, are still on handshake dictionaries. So they can, if they don't know how to spell a word, they can't put the first sound. They don't know the first sound. They will put a symbol for the hand shape, and then they can go to a dictionary where the words are sorted by hand shape. For them, I'm not going to teach them the alphabet yet, because there is just no use for them. There's no use case until you need to look something up in alphabetical order. Mixed feelings. For starters, I guess, again, it depends. If I've definitely seen kids who are actually very, very functional in spoken language, who really actually don't want to sign, and the parents are pushing it, which is so much better than the reverse. But I guess what I would want is that they don't, I wouldn't be trying to force them to sign if they're not feeling a need, but I would worry about why they have that attitude. I would want them to be in some sort of situations where they're seeing more deaf people and seeing that it isn't something to be embarrassed about or something bad. So I know most people don't have the option of a deaf school or a day a week in a deaf school. I know, because that's something I should mention. I don't know about other states, but certainly we offer part-time enrolment. If you're in a capital city, you may want your child part-time in a deaf school is another way to get them access. But yeah, I guess my thing would be why she's feeling embarrassed, especially because she's not 13, because when they're 13, they're embarrassed by everything. So it wouldn't just be the signing. But yeah, I guess I'd be worried about why she feels that it's embarrassing, not a cool thing. Yeah. I really hope that kind of thing. And I would actually go back and say, why? You know what? Anything someone tells you, ask them for the evidence. What evidence shows, research shows, could you tell me what research? Because I don't tell you anything if I can't tell you. I'm very conservative with claims I make. I am not going to tell you signing is going to improve their speech. I suspect it will. We don't know that. Like, we don't actually have the proof to show that. Ask people for why, and what's their evidence.
Thank you for your time this evening, Lou, and for sharing your research and your fantastic tips on creating a strong Auslan foundation, and for answering all those questions. It's much appreciated.